I think Mr. Singh will be joining shortly, so I think we can start. So maybe IT team, you can start the session at the live stream, and whenever Mr. Singh will join, I will introduce him. So good afternoon all, and again good morning to Eva. Thanks for joining in the CII-ITC 16th Sustainability Summit. And our today this in this year our topic is our theme is building a resilient future, leveraging sciences, technologies, and the finance. And again, when you are talking about the building resilience, so biodiversity is a critical component of the building resilience. And today we will be discussing on the which are the different actions we need to develop for the next 10 years of the decade or by 2050, and what will be the roadmap. So we will be discussing on that aspect. And I think before that, what I will do, I will quickly introduce our today's panel session. So maybe I will start with Dr. Vinod Mathur. So Dr. Vinod Mathur is actually is a chairperson, National Biodiversity Authority. So after serving of 33 years in the Wildlife Institute of India as a dean and then subsequently as a director, Dr. Vinod Mathur was appointed by the Government of India as a 11th chairperson of National Biodiversity Authority on the 1st September 2019. And the NBA is actually a statutory body of the Government of India who is managing the implementation of Biological Diversity Act and also supporting in the biodiversity conservation and sustainable management. So Dr. Mathur is having extensive experience in the research and policies for the wildlife conservation and biodiversity conservation. At present, he is currently leading the UN IPB's bureau member and also a UN CBT bureau member. He is a co-chair of IPB's task force on the policy support tools and methodologies and a member of IPB's task force on capacity building. He has also been a chair of UNCBD Informal Advisory Group on developing synergies between 7 biodiversity-related conventions. So again, he's leading all the UN delegations or related biodiversity delegation from the India. Our next speaker is Dr. Michael Buki. Dr. Michael Buki is a counselor at European Union delegation to India, and he is based in Delhi. He leads the section responsible for dialogue and cooperation between EU and India in the areas of biodiversity, environment, mobility, urbanization and smart cities, energy and climate change, small business, as well as the UN foreign policies and on investment. From 2016 to 2022, prior to joining this delegation, Dr. Buki worked in Jakarta holding similar responsibilities for EU, Indonesia and Asian countries. Dr. Buki holds a PhD and engineering degree from the French National School of Forest and Water Management. His core interest into the field is to find and share the pragmatic collective solutions for global citizens, producers and consumers to adopt to rapidly deteriorating planetary boundaries. Thanks for Buki for joining. Yeah, so I will just introduce Mr. Kavinder Singh. He recently joined our session now. Mr. Kavinder Singh is a managing director and chief executive officer of Mahindra Holidays and Resort India Limited, and I think you all well known it's a club Mahindra. He's also his aim is to develop a Club Mahindra into a world-class vacation ownership company. Focus on creating differential experience for the members, the Club Mahindra members. At present, he's also leading the CII's joint initiative with Ministry on the India Business Diversity Initiative. And Mr. Singh leads the efforts under this initiative on creating awareness among the businesses on the biodiversity and ecosystem services and how it can be integrated into the business decision making. Our next speaker is Ms. Eva Zabi. She is an executive director for the Business for Nature. She is having a background in natural capital and environment management. Eva is an experienced leader, facilitator, and speaker and writer who is leading this Business for Nature from 2019. So I will just brief you about what is the business for nature very quickly, Eva. So business for nature is nature brings together the business and conversion organizations and forward-thinking companies to amplify the powerful leading business voices calling for government to adopt policies on reversing nature laws for this decade. Prior to joining Business for Nature, Eva worked almost for 15 years with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is WBCSD. And some of her work in the WBCSD are on the natural and social human capital measurement and valuation for business decision making, and towards integrating performance management and ultimately reporting for investors. And most of her work on this natural capital and social capital valuation now rests with the natural capital protocol or capital coalition. So they are actually managing it from there. The final speaker for today's is Ms. Nairika Holkar. She is an executive director, director of Godrej and Boys Limited. She leads the digital strategy, brand, and legal part for the Godrej and Boys and its subsidiaries. In this capacity, she drives a company-wide strategy on building new digital interventions through online platforms and ecosystems to help customers experience, foster collaborative innovation, and enhance data-led decision making in businesses. As the brand custodian, she worked closely with the sustainability and marketing and communication team across the Godrej and Boys with a focus on building responsible corporate brand. And she is very keen on working on the mangroves restorations. So we will be hearing some more thoughts from her on the mangroves and the biodiversity conservations. So that's it from my side as an introduction to the speakers. And as we know that biodiversity is a very critical for the building resilience. And recently the WWF has come up with a report. So I will come up with a report, and they have identified that in the next few years, the overall investment in the infrastructure will be grown by will increase to almost 95 trillion at a global level. And again, most of that investment will be happening into the developing countries like India. And whenever the infrastructure development, it might be the roads or urbanizations or any infrastructure development for the industries or any urban cities, it is having a direct or direct or indirect impacts on the biodiversity, and it's resulting into the delays into the project and also the losses to the biodiversity. So considering that fact that if we want to achieve the post 2020 commitment or the 2050 target, which is now developed by the UN Convention on Biological Diversity for the living in harmony with nature. So what roadmap we should use and how we can integrate this post 2020 global biodiversity framework as a toolkit for even for the businesses and even for the government, or also integrating all the stakeholders in actually building the resilience and building the actions for biodiversity. Again, creating more awareness, just like a climate change discussion is going on the net zero, how we can trigger that type of discussion for the biodiversity. So that's my just brief background. And now I would like to invite first Mr. Kavinder Singh and I would like so from Mr. Singh, I would like to know from your side that what is the shift you have seen among the Indian businesses towards mainstreaming biodiversity into their business value chain. So over to you, sir. So you're not audible.
I think I made a mistake. Now it's fine. Hope
Yes,
I'm audible. All right. Thank you, Dr. Praveer, for the introduction. And I think you have set the stage for a very, very lively and interesting discussion. Well, I will go ahead and answer your question, but my objective would be to also, as a chair of IBBI, share the work that we are doing under the India Business Biodiversity Initiative. So, responding to your question, in the past couple of years, more businesses we find have become aware of biodiversity and recognize it to be important for their businesses. And we find that many companies today are actively taking up initiatives for water conservation, land restoration, adopting sustainable business practices one way or the other. Through the India Business and Biodiversity Initiative, we have seen many companies to come forward and integrate biodiversity across their value chain. Starting with 16 business signatories, this initiative has actually now has a membership of about 40 businesses as of today. As of 2020, I'm happy to report that 43% of the IBBI member companies as of core material value. In fact, this is, I'll give you more data. 38% of them have actually dedicated biodiversity policy, and 40% are working on no net loss approach, and 53% have adopted science-based target initiatives. I would again hasten to add that businesses have started recognizing that the company's activities not only lead to financial and economic outcomes, but also involve non-financial aspects like environmental and social impacts. With the growing concerns for degradation of natural resources, climate change, it is vital for businesses to reduce their impacts on nature. If I were to add about our SME sector, while all businesses are making efforts to address the challenges and set a positive footprint in some way or the other, it has been a bit of to come from these. We are noticing these to learn how and government this in Thank you, Praveer.
Yeah, thanks for the brief introduction and again presenting about what IBBI has did in the last few years. So I would now like to move to Dr. Mathur, and again, it's not a question, sir. So it's a maybe a point would be that how would the post-2020 global biodiversity framework would be integrated into the national policies and the action plan, and how the government is actually looking at the post-2020 framework. Over to you, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Dr. Praveer. I must begin by saying that it is not very often that I get opportunity to speak to business leaders and representatives from the corporate world. And that is the reason when you approached me, I took less than a minute to say yes, because I am now before you to share my own experience and more than that to learn from you. And basically the bottom line is that how can government and businesses work together? But I want to take this discourse to a very high level first, and what is going on at the global level as we understand the big group of G7 countries that include Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, and the US. See, they have very recently announced, and this has a bearing on our discussion today, that our world not only must become net zero that you just mentioned, we must become nature positive for the benefit of people and the planet. And this is the line I'm going to take in our discourse today, that how do we move to nature positive? And this is, to my mind, it represents a paradigm shift, how nations, businesses, investors, and consumers, they view nature. You would recall till some time back, what was the mantra? We were saying that we must do less harm, we must reduce impact, we must tread lightly across the world. Not that it is not needed, but today a new worldview is gaining ground. It is emerging. Not only emerging, I will say it is gathering pace. And that is about being nature positive. And that is why we need to work together with our businesses, that how do we go beyond this damage limitation? What if our economic activities not only minimize the impact, but can they enhance the ecosystem? See, the nature of the dialogue is changing. We are not just containing ourselves, we are going beyond that. Why? Because let me explain that a nature positive approach does what? It enriches biodiversity, it helps to store carbon, it purifies water, and overall it reduces the pandemic risk. So this is what we want, that a nature positive approach should enhance the resilience of our planet and our societies, and it should help to cover the nature's loss. And it is this worldview which needs to be converted into a movement, if I can say so, because we need fast-paced action on the ground. And I think our colleagues will recall that this year, earlier January, in the Global Risk Report, which was discussed in the Davos Business Summit, what were the three risks mentioned? Climate action failure, extreme weather, and biodiversity loss. I think this is the understanding we need to develop, that these are the big global risks, and therefore there is a need why industry, finance, government must work together. We need to scale up both preventive and remedial action. See, this is the bottom line of our discourse today, that we need to do this, both preventive and remedial action, and see what has been our experience in the last 18 months. That with drastic reductions in air travel, there is a global economic slowdown caused by the pandemic, but the climate effects have not slowed down. This is a big message which is now emerging. And you would recall the recent IPCC report 6, which says that we set up these targets, but we are soon going to breach the 1.5 degree temperature yardstick that we set up. So we now have a very small window of opportunity, put the things on the track. We need to definitely move what you said, net zero, to a nature positive economy, because this is what we want. And public spending is going to decrease because of expenditures which are going in to contain the COVID. And this is where we need to get back to our businesses, that we need to sharpen our appetite for innovation. How to make the shift? It is not easy. As I said, shifting to a net zero or to a nature positive economy, and that too, it should happen within a decade. But I'm sure our business leaders and representatives can think. And one thing which I want to mention to our colleagues here, that in all this point or time of gloom, there is some good news. And what is that good news? The pandemic has shown that when our backs are driven against the wall, incredible things can happen. And please understand what incredible things I am taking. The partnerships which have now been catalyzed between governments, scientists, private sector. And nothing else is so evident that this entire suite of vaccines which we have been able to develop in the 12 months time is because industry and government and scientists have worked together. We have the ability to innovate at a scale which is fast, and that is what we need to do. So what we need to do, what is my tagline for the business? We need to first see the connect between biodiversity and business, and then move on one more step. The connect between biodiversity and business on one side and with human well-being. All three things need to work together. And as you just mentioned, globally, actually, I have taken a time off to come out of the global biodiversity framework negotiations which are going on. And there is a very strong space which is being created for the businesses, because no solutions to climate crisis or to biodiversity crisis or to land degradation crisis can come in if we do not talk, if we do not integrate, if we do not forge partnerships with our businesses. So this is what I would say in my opening remarks, that we need to build these partnerships. The businesses are not enemies. They need to have a kind of a very strong linkage with governments, with scientists, with private sector, and so on. And that is what I will stop here, and I will wait for my other colleagues to follow what they think the businesses can come back and how they can integrate. Thank you very much, Praveer, for providing this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for your support. What we got in the CII, and also encouraging word that to address this biodiversity, we all three stakeholders, the government, the businesses, and the stakeholders, needs to come forward, and they should work as a jointly rather than just not doing the work. So thanks, sir. Thanks for your opening remarks and also giving the briefing that what is the need is required for the biodiversity actions. So now I would like to move to Dr. Michael Buki, and I think the question is for you is that how do you think that EU Green Deal will act as an instrument to mitigate the risk of biodiversity loss and support in achieving the living in harmony with nature? And I think you can see when the EU Green Deal is drafted when the drafting has started, even from that time, lots of businesses started working on the different areas of deforestation-free supply chain, again, how they can green their supply chain and all these things. So what do you think that this type of policies at a global level and national level will help to drive towards this living in harmony with nature as an objective? Over to you, Dr. Buki.
Thank you very much, Pravir. Good afternoon, Dr. Mathur. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to CII for the opportunity to address the Indian businesses. First, I'd like to echo very much what Dr. Mathur said, that although it's very needed, incremental adaptation, the do no harm principle is not sufficient anymore. We really need to engineer, plan, fund, and implement a transformative change, and change towards what Dr. Mathur called a nature positive economy. Do no harm is not sufficient. You have to do good, and you have to go fast in doing good. So it's a real challenge, not so much on the science. I think the science is clear. Albert Einstein was quoted, I'm not sure it's a true quote, but to say that if the bee were to disappear from the face of Earth, the man will disappear 4 years later. I think the value of nature, of pollination and other environmental services is obvious to scientists for a very long time. I think what's new is that the global governance and also the awareness of the economic sector that the foundation of the economic model rests on biodiversity and ecosystem. That much is new. That much is finally being picked up, and it goes way beyond agriculture. Of course, it extends to bio-based industries, wood industries, cosmetic, pharmaceuticals, and so on and so on. Even the energy sector with the biofuels. And yet, if you just take agriculture, the hidden cost of food systems, including malnutrition, deforestation, and pollution, they are already estimated at $12 trillion per year, which is more than the value of the food market. So it's really an economy which is eating itself and killing itself. So we have to change. There are already parts of China here where the farmers have to climb in trees and replace the bees that have disappeared, to take that image. So on biodiversity, we are more or less where we were on climate in 2015 when we were negotiating the Paris Agreement. And so you can already anticipate where it's going next. There will be a need to adapt whichever framework is adopted in Kunming. There will be a need to adapt those processes and those targets into the national policies, regulations, and incentives. That will be step one. Then there will be a second step where we will need an incremental process to make sure that all those national efforts, the amount of sufficient of a change to address biodiversity loss at commensurate pace. And then there will also be a need to reevaluate if public and private investments are supportive of such a change. So as to your question on does the EU Green Deal help in that direction, I believe so, of course. For those who may not know, the headlines of the Green Deal do not talk about biodiversity. They talk about becoming a no net emission, greenhouse gas emission continent by 2050, so basically carbon neutrality, economic growth being decoupled from resource use, and no place and no person left behind. These are the three headline targets. But then if you dig just a little deeper, you can see that the core innovation of the EU Green Deal is a systemic approach to those issues. And when you take a systemic approach to climate, to a new form of growth, it is a growth strategy. When you take attention to that, immediately you turn to biodiversity effects. So for instance, of course, we have a biodiversity strategy which sets the bar pretty high in terms of how much area should be protected, marine and terrestrial area should be protected. But we also have a farm to fork strategy which addresses the whole food system. We have a forest strategy which is meant to enhance carbon sinks. We set new standards for international finance. That is how to enable investors to reorient investments toward more sustainable technologies, business, and approaches. We talk about green bonds. We talk about an EU taxonomy that helps us and can help the world, screening criteria under which economic activities can qualify as positive from a climate and biodiversity point of view. So we are already going quite far in mainstreaming the biodiversity aspects, not for the sake of biodiversity, but because we see it as a condition of lasting growth and well-being. We are aiming next at an initiative for minimizing the risk of deforestation and forest degradation associated with the products which are put on the EU market. And of course, that has repercussions beyond the Indian border, the European borders. We're also looking at a soil strategy. So we're looking literally at the roots of biodiversity and making sure that the ecosystem still have the carrying capacity that enable us to grow food and bio-based material. The Green Deal is and has to be outward looking. It cannot just look at Europe itself. And so there is obviously a dimension which is relevant to India as well and to Indian businesses, that is reaching out through leaders. We have something called the Leaders Pledge for Nature that we are supporting and that we have invited India to support. On the business side, there is a United for Nature Alliance and Business at Biodiversity platform. We are also considering green alliances and partnerships with like-minded countries. So I think we have embedded into the Green Deal, there is a very strong mindfulness that we are all in it together, which is very much reinforced by the pandemic situation. The supply chains, the markets, the health, all those topics, they connect us very, very closely, and biodiversity or how biodiversity can help prevent future breakdown in our economic and health sectors, I think is a very important dimension. It has only strengthened since we are in this recovery period.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for explaining the overall green biodiversity deal or EU Green Deal, and also what is the linkages of this EU Green for the conservation perspectives. So I now would like to move to Eva. Eva, my question for you would be that why should business act on nature and how? And again, what would drive more business action, for example, on the policy ambitions or the commitment targets? Over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, and hi everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thanks to our great partner CII for the opportunity. And I have to say I'm really lucky because I can now build on the excellent points that the previous speakers have made. So I want to echo Mr. Singh's point about that increasing momentum and engagement and interest in the business community in India. We are seeing this at a global level. We already have more than, for example, 900 companies around the world that are urging governments to adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. That is through the call to action, nature is everyone's business. And it already includes 26 Indian companies like Mahindra, Mindtree, Wipro, Tata Steel and others. So I wonder, Mr. Singh, if there's an opportunity for us to connect efforts further to make sure that all of the 40 companies in IBBI are also represented through different platforms on the global stage. And we have so much to learn from the companies you and CII and others are working with from the Indian perspective. I want to build on Dr. Mathur's excellent points also about taking this high-level view, the integrated climate and nature, the twin crises. You know, we cannot tackle climate without nature as our ally, but we also cannot reverse biodiversity loss without a stable climate. It's clear cut. Also, this drive towards nature positive by 2030, the equivalent of the net zero for climate, and that raising political momentum. You mentioned the G7. Also, then Dr. Buki mentioned the Leaders Pledge for Nature, which I would also encourage India to sign up to as well. Business for Nature is a supporter of this. It demonstrates that political ambition and really gives that certainty to companies to invest, to transform, to shift their business models. And then finally, you know, I really want to strongly agree with Dr. Buki's points about the need to value nature in decision-making and disclosure. We need that systemic transformation to rewire our economic system and reward sustainable long-term performance that goes beyond financial returns. So yeah, that was a quick reactions, but some of the things I wanted to share anyway. Why should companies act for nature right now? Which means why would they protect, restore, and sustainably use natural resources? Well, as we heard before, all companies not only impact, but also depend on nature and the resources it provides. Businesses depend on freshwater, climate regulation, agribusinesses depend on pollination and pest control, hydropower companies rely on erosion control, and the list goes on. So the answer is simple. There is no business on a dead planet. No nature, no business. But nature is at a tipping point. So we know this. More than 1 million species are threatened by extinction. Over half of the world's GDP is at risk due to nature loss. But there's also the flip side of risk, which is opportunity. A nature positive economy can unlock $10 trillion of business opportunities, according to the World Economic Forum. So the question is, what can businesses do? And we basically distill it into 4 things business can do. 1, all companies must assess their most material impacts and dependencies on nature, climate, and people across their production and consumption value chain. Number 2, companies should commit to setting measurable science-based targets for how much they will contribute to protect, restore, and sustainably use ecosystems like forests, the underpinning foundations like soils and biodiversity. All of these targets should be as ambitious as possible. They should be public. They should be backed up with clear timelines, and they need to then report and disclose progress, of course. Number 3 is act. So all companies now should not only be acting to avoid and reduce the impacts of the negative impacts, but also regenerate and restore. We're really seeing a pickup not only around circular business models, but now regenerative, restorative, and that aligns with the nature positive concept that we need to get to nature positive by 2030. And then, you know, finally, the reality is that businesses alone cannot address this crisis. We need to work in collaboration, as we've discussed before, and governments must provide that political framework and direction and ambition, because policy ambition will then drive even more business action. And so the 4th step, so we had assess, commit, act, and now companies must advocate for more ambitious nature policies. That means engaging with governments to help work together to set those rules of the game. And there we go. So those are the 4 steps and some initial reactions. Happy to continue the discussion. Back to you, Pravir. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva, for actually presenting the structure in a very 4 very in a structured manner. So first, identifying the impacts and the linkages, then the measuring what is the how we can build the resilience or how we can restore or minimize these things. Then again, more focusing on the regenerate and restore things rather than just managing them. And then finally, engaging with the different governments that how the policies and the other changes are required to conserve the biodiversity. So now again, now I would like to move to our next speaker, Ms. Nairika Holkar. And ma'am, the question for you would be, I think the Godrej is again hugely working on the mangroves conservation and the nature restoration. So my question will be on the ecosystem conservation plays a very important role in a biodiversity conservation. And what actions can taken by businesses to work towards ecosystem conservation and restoration? Over to you, ma'am, Nairika.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. According to the State of Finance for Nature report, the annual investments in nature-based solutions would have to triple by 2030 and increase fourfold by 2050 from the current investments into nature-based solutions. So the authors of the report urge governments, financial institutions, and businesses to overcome this investment gap by placing nature at the heart of economic decision-making in the future. And they stress the need to, rapidly accelerate capital flows to nature-based solutions by making nature central to public and private sector decision-making. So, I think there are a lot of things that, businesses can do today. And a lot of these have already been touched upon by the esteemed panelists here today. But I think, some of the key targets that, businesses can look at would be, looking at water, waste, air, carbon emission management. Also, importantly, hybrid reporting metrics, because today the reporting metrics, either look at financial performance or they look at sustainability, and then you're looking at kind of maybe two very different companies. So how do we really look at the hybrid reporting metrics that enable you to look at both business performance and sustainability as a composite whole, rather than looking at separate sets of metrics? And also, unlocking the potential of nature-based solutions to close the finance gap by 2050. Now, are there, also in terms of, making nature a business case and an investment case, and whether we can couple investments in restoration action with financing conservation measures. Also, lately a lot of the CSR programs, not so many of them are focused on ecosystem restoration projects. So, if we can even look at, how businesses could maybe look at different methodologies for spending their CSR money, which would, look at ecosystem restoration projects. And also in terms of, employee engagement initiatives, to engage in volunteering programs like, the planting of indigenous species, spreading awareness. And especially important is, in terms of biodiversity friendly production, which helps companies to plan their sourcing with more focus on biodiversity integration, which enables them to predict long-term, sustainability of the supply chain, which is increasingly becoming, quite key. And also in terms of, the agricultural industry being one of the largest contributors to biodiversity loss, besides being responsible for more than 1/4 of the global carbon emissions. And in today's context, both the food and agricultural companies have a greater obligation than before to manage their land and supply chains with an aim to increase biodiversity in habitats impacted by their operations. And also similarly, infrastructure projects, given that there's so many infrastructure projects being sanctioned in India, for companies to be responsible and even creative when designing new infrastructure projects, for instance, roads, ports, mines, airports. Governments need to create policies and SOPs that drive growth, without sacrificing biodiversity loss. And there are also, shining examples of, where caring for the environment can be seen as a very good business model. For example, the Araku coffee plantations, which have emerged as one of India's best known premium organic coffee brands. It's a good example of a branded consumer business that's working in the tribal areas of Andhra and Telangana to build a business that increases biodiversity while creating a world-class product. And to touch upon some of the work that we've been doing at GNB, I'm proud to say that we have been consistent advocates for preserving and increasing biodiversity. Perhaps some of the lesser known initiatives that we've done is a plant research center named after my grandfather and spearheaded by my parents, which is doing work to increase biodiversity in the Western Ghats. So NGCPR has been actively conserving over 100 endemic plant species at their conservation center in Shirwal, and also to date has discovered a total of 9 plant species and has been recognized by the Department of Science and Industrial Research to conduct need-based research in terms of biodiversity and plant conservation, with particular emphasis on nurturing and propagating unique plant life of the Western Ghats, and specifically medicinal plants that are of national interest. So, I think it's also heartening to see a city like Mumbai take the lead in creating a robust climate action plan and focusing on greening and biodiversity as one of its key pillars. And this was also alluded to earlier. Deloitte report on climate change quantifies that economic opportunity gains could be around the tune of 11 trillion can take an immediate leadership in decarbonization and green solutions. But if we fail to do so, the top $1 trillion today. So I think clearly it's time to put biodiversity firmly at the center of every relevant business plan. And immediate collective action is the only way that we can escape a deteriorating future for our children. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am. Thanks for actually highlighting that how we can keep the biodiversity at the center of the economic decision making, and then I think that will be a very good opportunity, and also showcasing some of the examples where the investment in biodiversity has created a new and much return based businesses in the field of the agriculture and sustainability. So again, I am now going back to Mr. Kavinder Singh, and now the question is not about the IBBI, but it's more on the your group, the Mahindra group. And question is that yes, there are lots of challenges in biodiversity integration, but again, how in Mahindra you are able to address these challenges? And I think now your reporting is also it's have a specific section on the biodiversity, and lots of your decisions in the Mahindra decisions, biodiversity is integrated as a part of decision making. So over to you, sir.
Thank you once again, and the comments of Dr. Michael, Nairika, and Eva are much appreciated. I have actually learned few.
So yeah, you are not audible, Mr. Singh. You are not audible clearly. So I think maybe we'll again get back to Mr. Kavinder Singh when his network will be better. So again, Dr. Mathur, I'm again coming back to you, and so Dr. Mathur, I'm again.
Sorry, come back again. I missed that. Please come back with the question.
Yeah. So my question for you would be that Ms. Nairika just highlighted that we have to triple down the investment in the biodiversity, and I think the similar assessment you have undertaken in the Biofin project. Will you be able to share some of the lights on that outcome of the biodiversity, and what is the financial we required within India for the biodiversity conservation for the next few years?
See, it goes without saying that there is a huge amount of gap between what we need and what we have. There is no two opinion on that. And as you mentioned, under the UNDP Biodiversity Finance Initiative project, which is being run by 35 countries in the world. India is also part of that. We did a preliminary assessment, and we realized that our annual requirement is of 16.5 billion. Against that, we have 10 billion US dollar. So there is a gap of 6.5 billion US dollars every year if we were to support or meet the requirements. But the question is how this money is going to come. And because we are now dealing with corporates, because we have the head of the IBBI and other colleagues who represent industry, we need to look at several options. And one of the options definitely, which is, if I can use the word low hanging, is what the corporates are supposed to do under the umbrella of corporate social responsibility. And my understanding is that we have not made much headway as far as biodiversity conservation is concerned. And the reason is, I will be very candid in my comments, that traditionally the comfort zone for the industry, if I can sweep it like that, has been the education sector, has been the medical and health sector. So many corporates in the country are doing some excellent job in supporting both education and medical health. Not that they are not needed, they are needed. But at the same time, if under the portfolio of environment sustainability, we can take up some projects, we can take up some actions, and we can look at species conservation, habitat conservation. And you know that 2021 to 2030 is the UN decade for ecological restoration. And I would like to urge our partners in the corporate world that please come forward for that. We can design projects which can help you. You could do it in your own estates, in your own campuses, wherever you want. But restoration is very, very important. And that is what the world is now looking at, that if we were to conserve our biological diversity, we will also take up steps to conserve, to restore. And therefore, we would like to work with any corporate which may get interested in how ecological restoration is going to occur. It could be for soil, it could be for water, it could be for vegetation. There is no limit and there is no end to it. But whatever is the area of interest which our corporates may have, depending upon their work, we should be able to partner with them. My state biodiversity boards are now operational in all the states in the country, 28 of them. There are in the union territories, we have the Union Territory Biodiversity Councils. They are all waiting at how we forge this partnership. And this partnership is not just about money. It is a partnership of equity, of respect, of understanding each other, that business and biodiversity can work together. I'm sorry, as I said, I've been very candid. The traditional view of the business has not been so conducive for conservation. But here is the time to change. We have our business leaders with us right here in the panel itself, who have shown that there is a way out. All we need to do is to partner together. And that is my biggest message here, that partnerships can work wonder. If partnerships can create a vaccine, which nobody had in the world. This is another example where in partnership in conservation, we can work together. We can take up a few pilot projects. We can demonstrate that these are not sworn enemies, but they understand each other, and they, as a part of a society, are willing to forge a common reporting and a common work plan. I'll stop here, but we'll wait for our comments from our business leaders if they feel that partnership is something which, not that partnership has not been done. Yes, it has been done, but we need to scale up. We need to, the country is so big, we need to scale in terms of space. We need to scale in terms of cost. So I'll stop here, but partnership to me holds the key in our relationship. Thank you, Prabir.
Thanks, and also highlighting the willingness from the government to partner for the ecosystem restoration. Again, I will get back to Mr. Kavinder Singh. Sir, you are now, please, you can reply directly to Mr. Dr. Mathur's suggestions, or Over to you, sir.
Yeah, okay. I will definitely respond to Dr. Mathur's suggestion as well. And more importantly, to your earlier question about how Mahindra Group is dealing with the challenges. Am I clearly audible? Praveer, could you confirm?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
All right. So one thing which I wanted to share was that, as business, in some manner, the answer to Dr. Mathur, as well as, of course, the most interesting points that were made by Eva and Narika, and I'm trying to touch upon as to how we handle in Mahindras. I wanted to share that one of the challenges that we have and all of us have is to get a very good understanding of how biodiversity affects the business directly or indirectly. I think first, thing starts from how to really understand that the effects of not managing biodiversity, how would they affect the business? And that voice, but services from nature pretty much for granted. And this is what we have seen that. And the other thing is that the second challenge is that businesses must understand what actions are most impactful for businesses to take, which will actually create impact. Now, if I were to talk about a case study, which is Mahindra Group, in the Mahindra Group, we have been planting 1 million trees a year for many, many years. The current count in the Mahindra Haryali program stands at 19 million trees. By the way, mostly in the Araku Valley of Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah.
Of flora and fauna. I must say that we have a framework. All right. I'm stopping the video. Does that help? Stopping the video, does that help?
Yes, sir. Yeah, please.
All right. All right. So we have a 3C framework, and I would recommend that whether it is in terms of partnerships or whether it is in terms of setting up. First framework, obviously, the first C is conservation of natural resources. The second framework is the continuous improvement towards rejuvenating the environment. And the third one is comprehensive disclosures, because in some manner, when we disclose, we tend to be more mindful of our actions, and that helps us. And by the way, we have signed up as a group and as well as Mahindra Holidays, for various declarations, whether it is RE100, EP100, as well as EV100, and commitment to science-based target initiatives. So I find that it all starts with commitment. Once you commit what you want to do, you begin to look at the ways to make happen, and disclosures certainly help. The most interesting piece I want to share with you is that we have one of the resorts that is there in Karnataka. When we started that resort, it was built in a non-functional coffee plantation. And during the construction of the resort, we did not remove a single tree. Today also, if you're an avid bird lover, you can spend hours watching the wonderful species of birds on our resort campus. In fact, the temperature in our resort is about 1.5 degrees centigrade lower than the ambient. And I believe that this has actually helped us to endure recent floods that happened in Coorg with far greater resilience than the other resorts in area. So in our business, particularly in the business of resorts, we are, in Mother Nature, in the lap of Mother Nature. And we have to take a lot of actions right from the baseline assessments and ensuring that the flora and fauna are actually not disturbed but enhanced. And that is something that we are committed to. And on that note, I would like to hand it over back to Praveer.
Yeah, thanks, sir, for actually presenting the overall perspective of the Mahindra Group and also highlighting some of the business case from your own company, from the Club Mahindra. So again, I will quickly going back to Mr. Buki, and again, my specific question to you is that what will the preparedness required by the Indian businesses and the opportunity for those looking forward to scale up their operations, and again, how they can manage their natural relation with the nature?
Thank you very much, Praveer. I hope you can still hear me well.
Yeah, perfect.
So my first answer to that is that those who are in the room today are already one step ahead. I think being aware of where this is moving and how fast it is moving is the first step. So that's already an important part of readiness. to be aware of how high it is on the political agenda and how it will become even higher, I think, after the COP in China and maybe new targets are adopted. But you don't need to look very far. If you look into the guidelines on responsible business conduct that were issued by the Indian Ministry of Corporate Affairs in 2019, there are already two principles that show the way forward to readiness. The first one I'd like to highlight is Principle 2, which says that Indian businesses should provide goods and services in a manner that is sustainable and safe. And they insist in particular on the need to provide adequate information about environmental issues and impacts across the product life cycle. And I think that is critical. The fact that you cannot look at just one point in the production chain and ignore whatever happens upstream or downstream. It has to be a very holistic approach to the product life cycle from design to disposal. And it has to be grounded in objective science. It's always tempting, of course, to design its own sustainability policy and MRE framework. But there are certification schemes, labels, ratings, disclosure platforms that need to be built and that represent a common view on the topic. So not just do it in the corner, but do it in the largest possible forum. Another principle which I think is very relevant is Principle 6, which states that business should respect and make efforts to protect and restore the environment, and in particular, through the governance structure to assess, measure, and address adverse impact on the environment. Here again, the importance of information, especially as regards the impact in eco-sensitive areas, is highlighted. So working with those districts, those states, which manage to best protect their high biodiversity value areas is certainly a good indicator. It's a level 1 indicator, I think. If you are operating in an area which is very heavily degraded and you are not doing a positive difference, you are probably in trouble. The other thing is that there is a need to adopt innovative, resource-efficient, low-carbon technologies, basically the best practice of your industry. But there is also an encouragement to also motivate your consumers and your business partners to do the same. So it's not, once again, it's not only about being good by itself. It's about working as a network and pushing transformative change across the whole market. As far as EU is concerned, we really want to help and support this paradigm shift that Dr. Mathur was mentioning in a partnership spirit. At the G2G level, obviously, we do have several partnerships which are looking at environment, but also on a B2B level. So we are running a campaign at the moment which is called leadthegreenchange.in, Lead the Green Change, to which CII is associated. And on that campaign, there have been about 10 events since April. We are trying to release new reports that I think will be of help and of which the Indian businesses are very much invited to take part of, to advise on tech for markets on biodiversity, which technologies are most appropriate and should be explored in India to cater for better biodiversity results, and trade and biodiversity. We are going to enter into a new negotiation round for a free trade agreement between India and EU that was agreed at the Leaders Summit that we had in April. So is there a way to be more supportive of biodiversity positive development through the FTA? I think it's a question that will come up very strongly also on the European side, where our parliament is very adamant that those FTA should have a positive global footprint on biodiversity and climate. Beyond that, there will be a B2B event that we hope to organize with CII, and that needs to be finalized. I'm actually working on it right now. The Center for Responsible Business will also organize an annual flagship conference to which our ambassador, myself, the former EU Commissioner Janez Potočnik, as well is the co-chair of the International Resource Panel, and Eva, my fellow panelist, will also participate. I understand. I think it's a good meeting to attend. There is room for discussing how we can work in partnership. And the spirit of partnership is there definitely, but how do we do it in practice? How do we make it mutually profitable for EU and India to work in that direction? I think it's a very rich field, and I'm looking forward to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And so I will just quickly move to the last question to Ms. Nairika. What is your experience in the mangrove restoration, and how you are actually looking forward to increase that perspective? And we have a very short time, Nairika, just 1 minute. So just request you to finish your inputs in 1 minute.
Sure. So in respect, sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. So we began the mangrove conservation efforts about 7 decades ago, and under the stewardship of Godrej and Boyce and the Godrej Foundations, the whole mangrove ecosystem spanning from Vikhroli along the western bank of Thane became India's first ISO 14001 certified forest in 1997. And this certification has ensured time-bound measurable performance indicators and targets for conservation initiatives. So, over the years, we've done, we've set up a, dedicated mangrove information office, which basically looks at, creating mangrove trails to educate employees, schools, colleges, NGOs around the Mumbai metropolitan region. We've also started a mangroves club, especially with the children of our school, to spread awareness. We've also launched a Mangrove App, which was launched by the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, and it's a multilingual app which helps people at the grassroots who do not speak or read English, to understand the diversity within the mangroves, both from a flora and fauna perspective. And it's now reached about 106 countries. And we also have the only one of its kind dedicated website by a business organization to basically document all of the species of the mangroves. And what we believe is one of the key elements is research. So we've done over the years a lot of research on carbon sequestration, given that the mangroves are one of 3 species that make up the blue carbon ecosystem and help to absorb carbon at a much higher rate than other terrestrial systems. So, we've done carbon sequestration studies, and we're also undertaking a new study to do a valuation of the ecosystem services which mangroves provides. And hopefully that can help to convince policymakers about the financial importance of the mangroves. And additionally, we've partnered with CII and WWF to have, to form the Indian Mangroves Coalition, which basically brings together, policymakers, government, industry, and a various array of stakeholders to ensure that we're protecting and nurturing these systems. So these are just some of the examples of things that we've done for the mangroves. Thank you.
We have slightly run over the time, so I'm just going for the end. So thanks to all speakers for providing the valuable inputs for the actions for protecting biodiversity, and definitely these actions are very critical to sustain our future. So thanks to all, and so I think this session is over now, and